My name is Stefan Baumann, and welcome to another Baumann Effect. Can you believe it? It's number 21. On this particular episode, we are going to discuss skies and clouds and how to paint them. We're going to learn how to create clouds that have good dimension and good compositions. We're going to learn the law of thirds and the golden mean and the horizon line. Take a look at the point of view from the artist's perspective. How to start a painting, how to do the initial drawing, how to keep those brush strokes loose. We're also going to be talking about transitions and values and saturation, and we're going to be showing you the proper way of holding the brush. We've going to be covering boards and what to paint on, your surfaces, your primers, give information about how you can get a free book. There is so much going on in this one episode. You'll be happy that you watched every bit of it. So sit back and relax and enjoy this Baumann Effect number 21. My name is Stefan Baumann, and welcome to the Baumann Effect, which is basically a program that goes through all of the steps on painting, gives you all kinds of keys so that you can become a fabulous painter. With a little bit of extra coaching here and there, you too could be a master of painting. So we're going to do a demonstration that will include painting clouds. It's going to be another lake painting that I'm doing of Siskiy Lake, which is a lake local to where I live up in Mount Shasta. And we're going to discuss how to create clouds and cloud masses and put it into a scene, and also how to work with lake reflection. So it should be really interesting, really nice. If you really want to save some money, go get MDF boards at the hardware store, cut them into pieces, spray them with spray primer, and they are wonderful. For about 98 cents a piece, you can definitely create your own boards, and you can do high quality archival work. I mean, let's face it, if you're going to use Rust-Oleum's primer that you put on cars, why wouldn't that last on panels? So it's just a little help, a hint, if you want to save some money and still do quality work. You don't have to buy all those expensive canvases. In fact, I would recommend not buying expensive canvases until you get to much larger sizes. Briefly, if you want to get a free book, you can go to www.stefanbaumann.com. That's my website. Right at the very top, you'll see a free book that will give you everything I know about painting. I'm working on the second book that will be coming out that will deal with all of our temperature conversations. If you want some more information, I do spend some time while we're filming these to do some Patreon videos. So check out my Patreon site, watch my PBS show. Of course, I have my workshops both in the springtime and fall, but this is not here for me to advertise. This is here for you to get some painting. So let's get going here. The greatest secret, I think, in painting, when they say, you know, this is the secret to painting, temperatures is the secret. So if you want to know more about that, go over to the Patreon site, but I will be discussing a little bit about that today. If you go to the Patreon site, you can download 7 cool colors. They're right there for you, free of charge. And then I also have my keys I posted this morning. So if you want the keys, the Baumann keys, just go to the Patreon site, and there you can get the Baumann keys. We're up to 18, and those are available for anybody, even if you're not part of the Patreon site. Okay, so without further ado, let's get to painting. First thing, I'm going to be mixing a color. One thing that people say about these boards is that at the very beginning, they tend to be very slick. And people go, oh, they're too slippery. In fact, that's the same argument that people have when it comes to doing oil prime canvas. Oil prime canvases can be a very slick surface that's designed to be that. The more the pores are covered up, the thicker the paint that's on there. All those little holes that are in the canvas are like the holes or pores in your face. If you've got large pores, you don't have that same kind of peaches complexion as you had when you were 12 years old. And the same thing with canvases. All those holes, all those textures actually absorb light, and you lose the luminosity. So the first thing you wanted to understand is that a smooth board is luminous, and there's no reason to work on canvases until you get to a much larger size where the board would be too heavy to put up on the wall, or too heavy to even carry it around in the studio, especially with a frame. So I recommend staying with smooth surfaces until you get to about 24 by 36. Any bigger than that, the wood tends to warp. The old masters, you painted on boards up until the Renaissance, and then they needed larger pieces to go into churches. So they needed a way to take these huge studio works out of the studio, roll them up, and then restretch them. And that's why we work on big canvases. But for smaller pieces, the smoother surfaces give a much more beautiful finish. So just a note to self. All right. I'm going to be taking ultramarine blue and a little bit of asphaltum, and I'm going to cut my thirds. Now, the law of thirds is very important when we do paintings. It's a variation of the golden mean. The golden mean is a measurement that has been used by architects throughout the hundreds of years. It's dividing everything up by 1.618. And I do have a video on that on YouTube if you want to get a little bit more research on how to do that. But basically, it still breaks down to the law of thirds, so we try to keep it kind of simple here. You don't need to know all that golden ratio stuff. Okay, so we're going to break that into thirds. Again, we're going to do an emphasis on the sky, so I want to make sure that I have room for my sky here. I'm also making sure that my horizon line. Now, the horizon line is really crucial because that's actually where we're standing in relationship to the scene. And since we're looking straight out at you, this is where the horizon line is. And so when we look across here, we're going to be a little bit elevated. So the lake is going to be a little bit lower. Our horizon line will be here. And the horizon line will always be somewhere in the middle of the picture. Now, some people have said, don't put anything into the middle of the canvas. Well, something's got to be there. And if you're going to be looking at something where our eyes look, or a point of view, that's always like the center of the canvas. If we're looking down, that's the center of the canvas. So if you always to the direction that we're looking at, that's going to be somewhere in the center of the canvas. It doesn't have to be exactly center. We could actually lower it or make it higher. But we want to stay somewhere in the middle. And we just double check that. Very good. So that's our horizon line. And then we're going to put a suggestion of Mount Shasta from Siskiy Lake. I want to try to keep, Mount Shasta is quite large, so I want to keep the mountain kind of relatively small. I'm going to lower the lake line a little bit just because I want to be looking down. We're going to be further away from Lake Siskiy. And if you ever come to a workshop up in Mount Shasta, Lake Siskiy is one of the many shots that we have that we take you to, and we go there in the morning. This is going to be late evening, but we usually go there in the morning, and the scene is beautiful with the reflection in the lake, and we'll be talking about that as we go along. All right. So I'm just going to do it very loosely. Now, one of the questions that students give me is, do I draw things in carefully, or do I put in a pencil line? Should I use pencil to draw? If you notice when I'm drawing, it's very, very non-committal. I don't like to commit to a composition early on because I like to have my options open. I always tell it's like when you start a painting, it's like a first date. It's like you set it up with your friend to make sure that she calls you 10 minutes into the date and give you an out if you need one, or make sure that the restroom has a window so you can escape. So if you don't put in an exact line to begin with, you can adjust it to where it needs to be. And I do this even when I do wildlife painting. I like having an idea where things go, and then I commit to the painting a little bit later. So right here, somewhere Mount Shasta is going to go, somewhere the lake's going to go. If you put in a hard line, what happens is that it reminds us of when our mother used to give us a coloring book, and she would tell you, stay within the lines. And the problem with that is sometimes where the lines go at the beginning, it's not a good idea. So you want to make sure that you put lines in to suggest where things are, but you don't have to, like rigorously draw things when you first start. Painting is drawing with color, but we want to kind of stay somewhat loose at the beginning and then kind of pull it up a little bit later. It also helps us creating those brush strokes that we like, those loose brush strokes. All that stuff's done at the beginning of the painting. But if we have this line that we come up to, tightens it all up. All right. So first thing, my light's going to be coming from the left side of the painting. And that's crucial because the light, that's the area of light. We're going to be carrying that in. As we go through, we're going to get darker. And as we get to the far right-hand side, we're going to get darker yet. So we want to create the illusion with value, lighter to darker. But we also want to create the feeling that there's more light on the left-hand side and more dark on the right. Going to be mixing cerulean blue. That's the direction that the sun's coming in. Now, a lot of artists at this point would be working with one blue, like cobalt blue, and they'll be putting cobalt blue over here with more white, and then they'd be adding more dark, and then more dark there. And I like starting my paintings very saturated. Get the color out there and then lighten it up. I think one of the problems, especially when people do skies, is that they make them so wimpy. Get some blue out there. The reason why clouds don't show up on your paintings is because you're not getting the value dark enough. And then you get this soft little light blue floating in there. And then you try to put some clouds in there and the clouds just go away. So one important key is to get the darker color, and then we're going to transition. Now, transition is one of my keys. The most important part of painting is actually the transition, because in the transition is where the magic happens. So you have light, which is actually influenced by the sun, the transition color, which is where the color of the object actually is. In this case, it's a blue sky. And then we have the shadow color. I'm using very little medium. I'm going to go back here. And see now what I'm doing, when I originally started, I didn't have the pencil line in. These masonite boards are a little slick. And my students go, I hate painting on them because they don't grab. I always tell students, the end product is what counts. And I know it's a little slippery when you begin. I'd actually taken a little bit of liquid and I had kind of wet the canvas heavily before we started. And then about 2 minutes before we started, I lightly lifted it off so that it kind of breaks that initial tooth. You can also take triple rectified turpentine, which is what I use here, and you can kind of wet the surface of the canvas a bit, and that breaks that energy that's on the top of the board. So it makes it a little easier for the paint to stick. But you will get a lot of brush strokes in it. It's funny, everybody says, oh, there's too many brush strokes showing up, it's slick, it's hard to use, but yet they tell me they want more brush strokes to show up in their paintings. It's like, 6 to 1, half a dozen the other. But you kind of have to learn, when you're working with these, you kind of start learning how to work with this slick surface. And as you're working on it, it seems like the surface kind of gives a little. So don't be afraid of that slick surface. It's okay to get a little bit of brown into your sky. I'm going to actually introduce a little bit more brown into all this color just by adding just a little bit on my brush and kind of mixing it in. When I first started, I wanted to really get a nice, intense color in. So as I'm working on it, it just starts to kind of just melt onto the canvas. Everybody says, Stefan, you're supposed to hold the brush like this. See, if you hold it like that, like a steering wheel or a toothbrush, that's what you want. But the problem is when I do that, I access my right side of the brain. and consequently I have a hard time talking when I hold the brush this way. When I do this way, I kind of activate my left side of the brain. So you'll see me going back and forth. But since you guys want me to tell you what I'm doing. So now you're saying, Stefan, I thought you were going to put clouds in the sky. And it's like, yes, I am going to put clouds in the sky. Going to have a discussion about clouds. First thing, clouds aren't white. I hate to break you. It's just like the white of the eyes, they're not white either. I hate to just burst your bubble today. But you can mark the calendar, you could say, oh, this is the day that I found out that clouds are not white. So this is white, you know. And if I stuck white on there, and this is a beginner's mistake, what happens is that they look like big sheep sitting up in the sky, or big wads of cotton. Now, where the clouds are is quite a ways back. And if we can kind of think taking this paper towel, and we take it and walk across the street behind us and then walk further back and further back, the atmosphere, the reflections of light, everything that's around it will actually bounce on it, making this color no longer white. It becomes a reaction. In fact, as I take this paper white to the blue, it's also going to reflect on there too. So you got to remember that everything in this world is reflecting and illuminating and bouncing light, and it causes what you think you see differently. But it does appear to us as white because it's the whitest thing in the sky. So by putting in a darker color, we can go ahead now, and I'm just going to take pure white. Now I tell my students, don't use pure white, but it's not going to be very pure for very long. So I'm going to take the white and I'm actually going to mix it into my sky. Now some painters, they'll leave little holes because they've got their sketch out, and they'll leave little holes where their paint goes. But the problems with that is that as I paint in where I've left my clouds alone, it doesn't pick up any of the color below. And I guarantee you that if you have a cloud that's focused, or a cloud that's in your sky right there, I guarantee you that's going to be influenced by all of the reflective colors that are around it. So that's why we want to mix the reflective color in it, plus all the atmosphere that's between the sky, the clouds, and the viewer. So the clouds are the lightest thing in the sky, but they are not white. There's a movie out there called Local Color. I recommend you artists go rent it. It's a beautiful movie. It's about a young gentleman in high school who looks for a master painter to teach him painting. And they're out in the field, and he's painting the clouds white. And the master painter comes down and he goes, "Why are you painting the clouds white?" And he goes, "Because they look," it's like Mrs. Gugolinski, "they look white." And he goes, "You imbecile. Those aren't white. This is white." And he shows the white in front of the cloud, and then just drops the napkin. And the guy picks it up and he looks at it and he goes, "Holy Toledo, they aren't white." When you compare it to something that's up close white, you'll see the clouds aren't that white. And we go from left to right just like we read. And so the way that we want to work on a painting is that compositionally is that we come in on the left and we want to bring something that brings us back to the right. Right now compositionally we come in from the left. We're going to bring in a wonderful tree over here somehow. I got to have always something on the right that stops the viewer. I don't know what that is going to be yet, but we're going to have to go up, and then I'm going to work the clouds so that they drift across the canvas. So they'll start off pretty heavy here, and they'll feed compositionally, and I'm going to actually have something out here that turns the viewer back down. What we want to do is create an energy like that. So I'll manipulate the clouds ever so much over here to have kind of a swirl, to have it go down. Let me get some more white on there so you can see that. But I'm just putting in footnotes. Now when I'm doing a painting on location, the first 10 minutes of my painting are the footnotes. And footnotes are crucial because that's the original idea. And that's why I don't like keeping a painting up sketched and copied, because I want to be able to manipulate the subject matter. And when we find ourselves on location for a moment, we're so enthralled with the beauty of everything that things slip our mind as we start from the left-hand corner and go to the right. So what I do is I quickly put in the drawing within 10 minutes in the footnotes of ideas that I have, putting the center focal point in, and so on and so forth. I always tell people you have no business putting in a painting together until you have a central focal point. So I have already determined my central focal point will be, if I go from left to right, my center focal point will be within my middle third that we talked about. And it's going to be over on this side. And then I need to lift something up compositionally. My clouds will drop down over here. I'll probably have a little bit of some lines coming down with some foothills to kind of bring the viewer back down. And it's always this kind of keeping the viewer in here. If you just kind of think about everything just being horizontal, the problem with that is that the viewer looks at it and then they just wander by to the next one. You actually point them to the other one. So people are very easily led. So I'm purposely mixing the color into my blue color. And these will actually react as the shadow for my clouds. The color now becomes the shadow color of my clouds. So and then I'm going to put another layer of highlights on top of that. But right now, what I'm doing is I'm mixing the color that I just put in the white paint. And the white that I'm using is titanium white. And one thing I want to get across with whites, because they always go, well, what white do you use? And I don't use zinc white because somebody tells you that it's wrong. And all this. It's like, white is a value maker. It has no color, it has no purpose. You could sometimes use it, the transparency of it, but really it's just to make values. It doesn't have color. So there's no purpose in it except just lightening up your color. Titanium white with a little bit of zinc goes a long way. You don't have to go look for it. One of the most popular paints that when I was growing up was Primalba. And the problem with Primalba is that it was like hand cream. It was so goopy. And if I had a reason for white, my white would be thick and heavy. That would be the main thing. I think Primalba is like cold cream. It's kind of too watered down, too thin. There's not enough thickness to it. When we go to put in highlights, the thicker the paint, the brighter it appears. And we need a paint that actually holds up like thicker, that actually we can put on, we can sculpt. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be putting layers of titanium white on here to get the highlights. The more we kind of blend this in, the more shadowy the clouds become. So if I end up putting too many clouds in here, if you watch my episode on making trees, you do the same thing here, is that you actually can go back in with your darker color and you actually could go in and just resculpt them. And sometimes I always recommend to do that, because sometimes doing negative shapes into your clouds is a good thing. So you could see I'm taking the ultramarine blue, which is that dark blue that I have in here. And so we can kind of go in and we can kind of break that cloud up again. And see how nice it is when you're working wet on wet? There's just a thing that I have artists who come in with acrylic artists. And you can take coaching and work with me with acrylics, but I kind of try to push artists into oils if I can. But I have a lot of acrylic artists and I love them. The thing that they don't get is the fact that I've been talking here for a half hour and I'm pushing wet paint around. And the great thing about it is that I can still move it around without having to dry it. And I could still go back in with soft brush strokes and blend the two together. The painting or blending of brushes or the blending of paint is so critical that oil painters will actually put retardants into the oils to make them last longer while we work with them. So you don't need to worry if you overdo this section. You can just go back in and put some more blue. And at this point, the clouds start to sculpt. Got to remember that I started off with cerulean blue here, cobalt here. So if I'm going to be putting in some background around my clouds here, I've got to be putting in my cobalt. Over there is the ultramarine blue. And can you see how wimpy these clouds are over here? So I'm going to go in with a little bit of cerulean blue and darken around them. If you don't get the value around your clouds dark enough, they just don't show up. Remember how I said I wanted these down brush strokes here. Work this. The more times I work the sky color into my clouds, the more my clouds start to get more form, more mass. You want that sky color to mix in with your sky color. That's going to be your base color for your clouds without putting color into it. If I was going to add some more shadow into it, I might most likely will take asphaltum and some ultramarine blue, and I can put in a little bit more dark in here if I want to have more shadow. So, okay, now the magic, the highlights. Now, the thicker the paint, the brighter it appears. And some of my colleagues will actually put at this point some paint on with a palette knife, nice and real thick, to get their highlights on their clouds. I'm going to pretend this is a palette knife or just a soft brush. Now, if you notice, this brush that I'm actually using is a Royal Line Nickel, which is kind of an expensive brush, but it doesn't need to be. It's actually an artificial haired brush. Line Nickel is a really nice paint company, really nice brushes. These ones are their low-end ones. They're really kind of a beautiful brush. Not too expensive though. But if you notice, I'm kind of painting all with one brush. And it's not because I'm lazy and I don't like to clean brushes, but I actually am lazy and I hate cleaning brushes. But that's not the reason. The reason is that you don't need a lot of brushes. If you figure that right now I'm using the flat of the brush here, I can turn the brush this way and I can get a small line. So a lot of these small lines are done with the exact same brush. You don't need to buy a lot of brushes, and that's a fallacy too. So many people that are interested in painting, they go, oh, I can't paint, it's too expensive. But the reality is that it's not very expensive at all. You just need a handful of colors, a couple of masonite boards or MDF boards that are sprayed with primer that cost you about $1 a piece. And then some inexpensive brushes to start off with, and you just start pushing paint around. The most expensive is a teaching and coaching, and the most expensive is your time learning how to do that. But, you know, students that go, well, I'm just going to paint on cheap boards or paper or whatever, and I'm going to use my mother's brushes that are all dried up anyway. Doesn't matter, I'm learning how to paint. It's like, no, you have no idea the difference between having decent brushes and not. Brushes are the surface of the canvas, and I have students that finally go to rosemary.com. She doesn't sponsor me in any way, although we're good friends. That's a good place to buy brushes. And they buy a couple, maybe a brush like this. This is a number 9 or 10. Yeah, 10. 10 flat, and buy a 6 flat and a number 2 flat and number 1 round, and you're set. But they start painting with these brushes and they go, oh my God, and you can almost see the difference in their work immediately. So invest in some brushes, it's well worth it. And then the most highly prized brush of all is your finger, like this. And some of you health nuts are going, oh my God, Stefan's touching paint. I have been touching paint for 40 years. And where has it got me? My own TV show, Baumann Effect on YouTube, Great Paintings and Collectors, Big Ranch. There's no harm in it. Just push that paint around, your finger. One of the nicest places, if you're going to use your fingers, is like this side of your thumb. The inside or outside of your thumb, that's great. The side of your pinky is also a great place to kind of pick. Okay, just softening the edges a little bit. Now, picking up white thickly. There's no medium. Remember I said the thicker the paint, the brighter it appears. And it's colored light on top of here. Oh, it's so beautiful. It's got just enough red in there. If you could see what I'm seeing, you'd be like going, oh, that's beautiful too. Now this is going to be picking up also some of the color that's there, because remember, what we're actually seeing up here isn't really white. So as I push this around, I want to pick up the color that's underneath. The thing is, how I told you that there's so much bouncing atmosphere that whatever you put in there is going to be a different color. All that sky color and stuff is bouncing. It's going to be a little bit different color. When all of a sudden you have something that's getting light on it, that light will actually still be influenced by all the sky colors, but it's still going to illuminate out. It's going to be stronger. It's going to penetrate because it's bouncing light to the viewer. So it's going to be definitely a little lighter, but it's not going to be white. Now, I was telling you last week about rocks. Yeah. If your rocks look boring, if your brush strokes look boring, it's because you're painting boring. You want to be sure that everything you put onto the canvas has a nice touch to it, a flair, some calligraphy, some upstrokes, downstrokes. Don't just take the highlights and go blah, blah, blah. Don't just lick it, I mean, when you think about what we're doing right now, it has the possibility of being on this earth for 400, 500 years. You know, it's kind of hard to think about it, but Leonardo da Vinci never thought that his stuff would be around. But when we think about that, 400 or 500 years, it's worth putting in some extra work. You know, the thing is, your paintings might suck. You go, oh, my paintings won't be around that long. But I guarantee you that every thrift shop and every garage sale out there has a stack full of paintings that people are just too afraid to throw away. Because you just never know if that painting is worth something at an antique roadshow. So, I want to put in a little bit more of that Phthalo red rose or permanent red rose. That is in lieu of alizarin crimson. Right now, go into your studio, get your alizarin crimson, and throw it away. And get yourself some permanent red rose or permanent phthalo red rose or permanent rose or magenta. Quinacridine is good. Anything but alizarin crimson. It's been the staple of artists for years that it has no value whatsoever. It's an ugly color. So let's go ahead and work on the rest of it so we can kind of see where it's going. And it's really hard to tell the colors and values and stuff in a painting with all this white space. So remember I said in the first 10 minutes you want to go in and put your footnotes in. You also want to go in and get the canvas covered. So we're going to cover the rest. It's just a gray. So people go, well, why are you always painting Mount Shasta? And I go, because I live there, and art should be autobiographical. It should be about your life and where you're at. If you notice, when you look at really great artists like Maynard Dixon or Georgia O'Keeffe, Percy Gray, they're all people that have painted the environment where they live in. And so if you live in an ugly place, then try to find the beauty in it and share it. And it doesn't have to be this big, grand Western scape. You can find beauty in a trash can. Yeah. Now, that's one of the things that you kind of want to understand, is that value and temperature are two separate things. And so when we mention value, that's getting things darker because they're getting closer to us. That's separate from things getting warmer. So as things come closer to us, they get warmer and they get darker in value. Okay, as things get further away from you, they get lighter in value and they get cooler in color. They're two separate ideas going on. Then Siskiy Lake, which is a beautiful lake in Mount Shasta, will go in next. We're going to probably bring this down just a little bit further. Remember, we want to kind of always have the horizon line somewhere in the middle of the painting, so this is where the horizon line would be. We're going to be levitated looking down at the lake, so the horizon line is going to be higher than the lake itself. Normally, if you're down at lake base, where we usually go paint, the horizon line is directly at where our eyes are. But this is going to be a little bit lower because we're going to be higher, darker value. This is going to be broken up into all kinds of little mountains. Doesn't really matter. This is just footnotes. We're going to start taking the sky colors because they're handy right now, and we're going to start painting the lake. The lake will occupy this area here, and we're going to be doing vertical strokes. When doing water, we always want to make sure that we go vertically. You know, the thing is, it's aerial perspective. When you're talking about things getting further in back, it's aerial perspective because the values and the temperatures change. But as far as linear perspective, not yet. You'd actually have to have something going in a direction or a line that you would have linear perspective. We would have perspective, of course, with large trees in the front and smaller trees in the back. That would be perspective, but well, when we try to understand what perspective is, we kind of first think of it as something we see in a building or in a three-dimensional object, and then in landscapes we have aerial perspective, which is a little different, but we do have regular perspective too, linear perspective. Now, remember when we're doing the sky, we had more blue, cerulean blue over here. I'm reflecting the cerulean blue down into the water down here. Notice I'm going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. That's the secret behind painting water. Up and down. Now, usually the color in water is more intense than it is in the sky as it comes closer to us. So we want to kind of get more color. So I'm taking this color here and I'm putting it in my water. And again, these are just footnotes. As we go over, we add more cobalt blue. That's going to be coming in here. And then on the far right, we're going to be putting in ultramarine blue, just the same as we did in the sky. Now, usually what I like to do is just an added artistic secret. Somewhere in the middle of the painting here, I like putting in a light reflection. And when we're talking about composition, you would know why I'd want that, but that's usually to bring the viewer down to the inside of the water there. So down towards the bottom, we will have a brighter light right there. And as I'm taking out the white of the canvas, you will notice that the clouds actually are going to start appearing brighter and brighter. Okay, vertical, 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 vertical. There's only one problem with doing water this way at this point, and that is we have to do horizontals. Now, if I were painting outdoors, I wouldn't worry about it. I would just be putting in footnotes that are vertical like that. If I were working with acrylics, I'd have to deal with it. With oils, you can kind of leave it, we can push it on. But when you look at water and squint your eyes, you will notice that there's a heavy verticalness to the water. So on and so forth. We're going to quickly put in the foreground really warm. This is asphaltum on steroids. Love that color. Asphaltum works better than burnt umber, raw umber. If you don't have asphaltum, the same color is transparent brown oxide. Those are wonderful colors to use. But we're just going to put in the footnotes. Like I said, all this would have been done the first 10 minutes. So this is the hillside that we're up here. Right here where it's really bright there, I'm actually going to make the land in here darker. And as I darken that, notice that glow that we all of a sudden see in there. It's like, ah, the earth angels are here. Let's darken this up. We're going to take, we'll have some kind of footnote for a tree here. We want to curve that. Oh my God, it's looking so beautiful. It's like, oh, I could see the finished painting. We're going to curve that trunk a little so that it kind of bows in the viewer in here. Again, these are just footnotes. I'm going to add some cad yellow to my ultramarine blue, cobalt, and we're going to lay in some dark tree. So this would be a couple pine trees here, because no Northern California painting would be complete without having some pine trees. We'll have some, let's get that trunk in there so you can kind of see, oh my God, Stefan's gone crazy. The Baumann effect is taken over. That is the preliminary for Siskiy Lake in Mount Shasta, and we are completely out of time. I'm going to be working some more on this when this is all over with. I have the second and third part available on Patreon, where you get the inside track on a lot of the information, and you just take the lowest level, and that gets you into almost everything. So until we meet again, always remember to paint with passion. And what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Except bears. Bears will kill you. You have a fabulous week, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for watching. Wasn't I right? There is so much information on this one video that you probably have to watch it over and over. And be sure to watch all of the other Baumann effects along with my PBS show, Painting in the National Park. If you want to get more information on anything that we discussed, do so by going to my website at www.stefanbaumann.com. And there you can get a free book, you can find out information about my Patreon station, you can find information about my workshops and things that I'm up to. So it's definitely a great source, a lot of information. But seriously, if you really want to make a difference in your art, I highly recommend coaching. I know there's a little more costly, but there's nothing like one-on-one conversations about your art. They're every week, they're half an hour, it's just between you and I. You will never find this offer from anyone. So I highly recommend, if you're interested, give me a call at 415-606-9074. And until then, always remember that when you're going into the studio, that you want to paint with passion. I'm Stefan Baumann, and thank you for watching.